am Provides. I officially welcome you to the Contextual Intelligence Workshop, Biomimicry, AI, and the Land-Water Interface. So this is what we will do over 3 days. This is day one. You will learn QGIS with the talented Navi. And then day two, which is tomorrow, you'll learn Biomimicry and Grasshopper with Carlos and Jane. And on day three, which is like next week, when you come back, we will learn how to take your models and visualize it really quickly using Xfigura or Midjourney. And then day four will be the final review day. We have a fabulous panel of judges who will select the best design prize for us all. I'll announce more results later. So what we hope everyone takes home, it's not just the technical skills, but actually from the GIS mapping, architects can learn to read terrain and hydraulic systems so we understand ecology. And through the Grasshopper generative algorithm, we actually learn to encode ecological principles into conceptual systems for architectural performance. And of course, we need that agility between workflows that can connect one and two into procedural design. And finally, AI is a tool for us to quickly generate speculative imagery that can tell us this future is more habitable both for human and non-human agents. And so it's very important that with such diverse skill sets and knowledge to take home that we need to work in groups, both for design thinking, the technical, ecological, and narrative, different aspect to come together. And we hope that this experience will be one that you can take home with you and apply to your home context as well. So we will be your instructor for this program. We've introduced ourselves, so I'm not gonna repeat that. But the motivation to have this series of free workshop is actually we want to build this ecology where architects and designer receive the free tech upskilling because of the increasingly digitized and automated industry, but also give back to society. So for those of you who are based in Hong Kong or not, we have the chance to engage public school youth so then they would be able to absorb this knowledge and they can be more resilient against this climatic future. So that's the ultimate goal. So this course is taught completely free of charge and it's international. We want this to not just be a workshop, but kind of like a think tank where we crowdsource all these ideas. For planetary problem, we actually need planetary scale effort. And that's, I quote Benjamin Bratton. And so, which is why we wanted to put this workshop together. So this is the first hour. It will be a quick introductory talk. I'll talk a little bit about contextual intelligence, how we interpret it. Nabi will introduce the land-water interface idea in urban design. Nabi will talk more specifically about biomimicry design and how that gets encoded into algorithm. And then finally, Jane will show a very fabulous series of design, precedent example, and how AI is actually adopted into the design process. So let's get started on contextual intelligence. So this photo is from 2013, is where I was born and raised and grow up, is the way that we built the city. What this image tells us is that we're quite successful in a compact city model. In fact, 70% of Hong Kong is green area, which means that we manage to preserve this much ecology by being so dense. But at the same time, it also showed that our urban-rural integration is not doing so well. And so as trained as an architect, we have to ask ourselves at this point that with the need to create buildings to intelligently respond to both ecological and cultural variables. And this is increasingly facilitated by generative algorithms. However, a lot of the generative AI that is trained on mainstream dataset actually have a very normative understanding of this world. And it easily homogenize both our design practice, the outcome. And so the whole project wants to confront this homogenization at the forefront of sustainable architecture. And the question becomes, how do we embed both contextual intelligence, is both environmental and cultural, into the automated workflow without reducing design to universalist optimization, while designer can still maintain creative authorship in the process. So the whole thinking behind a workshop comes from this. This is some of the projects that the Bartlett investigate. For instance, Gilles Risson, he think about how we can learn from nature as a form of collective intelligence. You discretize data, but you also discretize architectural component, so it benefit automation. Daniel Kohler, also professor at the Bartlett, he thinks about, well, if a city is actually made with subsystems that accumulate into larger systems, we must also design urban fabric by understanding, and he called this mereology. And all of these actually came from an understanding of nature as a collective intelligence. And so I think 5 or 7 years back, I worked with Alberto Fernandez, David Doria, Nicolata Karastasi, and also with Carlos. We started this AI informed workshop series. And at the time, it was still about pigs to pigs, generative adversarial network. And what we wanted to do was that how we synthesize this more traditional rule-based system with machine learning system, so then they teach each other rather than a replacement. Um, this is a video from a participant from the workshop like 5 years back. And what we did at the time was that we used a pixel data to train the pigs to pigs. And then that can be used to control voxel data, which then you can, in Grasshopper, do your environmental simulation and then export those points into pigs to pigs and train the AI algorithm. And then the AI would be able to speed up the whole environmental simulation process much, much quicker. But as you can see, at the time, we were still following the logic that traditional and intelligent algorithm are working more parallel. But 5 years from that day, we have different thinking. Yeah, so this was the pipeline. You have the 2D pixel, which speed up the process, and then you stack it up at voxelized, and then eventually you can swap in the voxels with architectural components. So these were some of the projects from 5 years back. For instance, we can learn from bioluminescent organisms in the ocean, how they distribute themselves as a system, and to think about how we can distribute light with a city for equal access to energy and light sources. And this was by Veritana Bogdan and Chanru. Also Veritana Giovanna, she used the same pipeline to simulate algae growth, and then she integrated it with luminescent solar concentrator to think about how can pavilion at the same time harvest light but provide shading for public spaces and build this beautiful, beautiful bio-inspired pavilion. But also the same pipeline can be used to learn from mushroom growth for urban elements that can absorb heat during daytime and release them during nighttime, or use it to design facade system that can help local organisms to rehabilitate the building facade of skyscrapers while providing enough shading and greenery. Some of them, Carlos would also talk a little bit about this project later. Some of them think about more harsh environments. Environments are super under-resourced. How can we still build for them? And so, for instance, some of the participants think about, well, what if we can upcycle cargoes into refugee towers, but at the same time still be able to harvest light using the facade material? Yeah, and this was also what Carlos did with the same pipeline from 5 years back, learning from Lishan in Highland area. He will talk a little bit more about this. And so as you can see, with the same pipeline of translating data from pixel to voxel, we were able to generate vastly different design generation, and we were able to speed up the process. For instance, if we use cellular automata, it took 6 to 7 hours and perhaps 1,000 generation and 70 gigabyte to achieve a highly optimized design. But with the train algorithm, the result is generated instantaneously. However, there's always limitation in research that the accuracy, we will only able to get it up to 70% than traditional algorithm. And it also takes a lot more GPU power. And so with these constraints, we started reflecting on the work. How do we understand the emergence from this process? How can we use this process to For instance, understand different contexts, local organism as inspiration. What if we have the same context close to the equator, but suffer from vastly different climatic concern? Does the same algorithm have bias inside, or are we able to use it to generate different designs? Can we combine active and passive strategies into one design? Or if we're working with scarce environment without any data representation or without any social economic resources, how do we design for those? So these were the knowledge generated from the process that goes beyond the technological progress. This was actually one of the diagrams that also Carlos reflected, was how the role of architect actually changes by combining paths of data, that the architecture is self-configuring because of the fast amount of data. It can reconfigure itself every month, every day, every hour, every minute. So what is the role of architect in that process? And I think 5 years from that day, which is today, because the AI has progressed so much, I think we now have more questions than answer from that day. And so we would like to explore with you, what do you think, after learning from all of this technology, would be the meaning of it? And as the father of AI, Marvin Minsky, one of the father from the 1961, proclaimed that the science of making machines that do things that would require intelligence if done by human. However, this intelligence does not necessarily imitate humans. For instance, we know there are biological intelligence without neurological synapses, but are able to survive harsh environment. Neurointelligence, need not explain. Design intelligence, the architect intelligence, how do we encode them in algorithm? And collective intelligence. These are being rapidly tested and applied, for instance, using slime molds to design train networks, using adversarial network to design floor plans. And of course, Renaissance is one of the peaks of human intelligence and collective intelligence, as explained before. And so I'll just quickly show some directions of biomimicry design that we can all take home and think about how we can actually apply in architecture. And it's really the studying of nature's 3.8 billion years of evolutionary models, systems, and processes to solve human challenges sustainably. This is from the movie Avatar. I haven't seen it yet, but I actually saw this report from the National Geographic. The way that it does biomimicry design is magical because it takes something that was natively belong in a hydraulic condition, so like a pufferfish or jellyfish, and then they put it in the air. And so what it does is to imagine a totally different way of navigating aerodynamics by understanding hydrodynamics. And in fact, I think this was from 2014. A bunch of scientists from the Royal Society already saw the potential of this. So they actually published a paper over how jellyfish can actually inspire flying machine. And they were able to press the weight of unmanned vehicle down to 1.2 grams through this movement by enhancing lift and minimizing drift. So something so populous in the ocean, but sometimes often overlooked, actually has bigger use than what we think they would do. However, architects currently, with our tendering schedules, procurement processes, we don't have time to think about these animals. And so by blending real biology with fiction, it makes the impossible feel plausible. Again, flock system. I think Jane might discuss this, but not necessarily show it in this workshop. It is now rapidly used to control, again, drones to fly in a flock formation. Slimal, as mentioned before, because they're really good at finding shortest path, we will use this algorithm a lot in this workshop. And so it was used to simulate the train network. And it was found that the American train network was very, 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 very non-efficient, but the Tokyo train network was very efficient. Melanin, the elements in our body that help us stay against the sun, can it be used as a sustainable building coverage material? Or Graham. This is actually one of my favorite speculative design projects. They actually designed a human body that can sustain car crash. And it shows the amount of forces a human has to take if we do not wear seatbelts. We need our lungs very, very pressed. We need our nose very behind so it wouldn't hit on anything. We need our brain suspended and insulated. And so many of these designs are utility oriented, but some of them are actually a warning that tell us if we continue to do things a certain way, then we have to evolve this fast in order to survive that future. And so at this workshop, I hope that everyone can feel free to be imaginative as you can while we're solving one of the realest world problem. And so the only rule is really to have fun. You can integrate biology, design, technology, geography, and science fiction to emulate nature's strategy for innovation. So it's essentially project-based learning, but it's also real-world problem solving, which is why we call this the Science Scientist Incubation Program, because we want to say that we're not just designing because something is beautiful, because we feel like it, but there should be science guiding this. A little bit more useful information over the target site of this workshop. So I think this was from 2 years ago in Hong Kong. This is a hotel glass door, and this is the amount of water that was flooding in a hotel, and people couldn't even hold their grounds. Um, and Nabi actually taught me this, that we often say this is natural disaster. Oh my God, the water's flooding it. But if you actually look at where they put this five-star hotel, you realize they put it in the way of water. So maybe it's not water flooding us, it's we unintentionally or intentionally walk into water. And it's the same for this village. That I think over the past 3 years, every year it recorded consistent flooding up to the knee. And so all of the ground floor electrical appliances that's worth more than 10,000 US dollar of each household has to be thrown away. And imagine how do village people live like this for the rest of the future? It's impossible. And next to it, again, is a very beautiful new development. This is actually not a bad development because it combines indoor, outdoor luxury, community services, pet parks, children playground. It's beautiful. But at the same time, some villagers will complain that it's because of the new development that had led the water to flood their village. However, we currently have not enough data to validate what is the cause. And so this become a very interesting site for us because it has five-star hotel, it has a new development, it has very traditional villages all around it. Some of them may be over 100 years old. We have fish farms, we have beaches, we have mangrove, we have wetland. It's a very diverse topology. And this is like a micro scale of much of Hong Kong's northern metropolis look like? Is this diverse topology? But in our current way of doing the zoning plan, we simply circulate a piece of land and we tender out. And so there is no synthesis between these plots. And so through this workshop, what we hope to do is that by understanding this site, this is a perplexity analysis that I also sent out. We know their flood history, we kind of know their flood causes, but there were never complete reports. We know that it's low topography. We know that the roads infrastructure project is affecting. We know a lot of debris are clogging channels. From Navi's GIS analysis, we can see the elevation contour, but because there were no public records over the rainstorm and landslide report pre and post development, so we cannot be sure what was the real cause. There lack causation hydraulic models for us to understand. We can demand drainage impact assessment report from the drainage service department, but I think most importantly is the architect has the power, are empowered to be able to do these assessments on their own before they make any decision. And so I'll quickly show some nature-based solution potentials. For instance, we can learn from mangrove in order to do seawall. Better yet, we can restore mangroves so they can do what they do. We can do hillside reforestation to slow the runoff so we retain the soil, do not soil erode. And we can think about how we can do that in this river and sea intersection. Traditional Chinese villages has a lot of water city layouts that are really good at absorbing water and letting them go seasonally. Intertidal stream ponds. Essentially, you see it as a fish farm, but it's actually an operation technique to also prevent flooding by using local earth packed um, in high density. Or ways to recover corals as tidal barriers. So these are how we try to integrate biomimicry and nature-based solution. But at the same time, we need understanding of fabrication when we do the design. We need to understand ecology. We need to understand geography. And so at this point, I'm going to pass to Nabi to talk a little bit about geography.